All right, Jane, you are all good to go to introduce us.
Thank you, Dane. And welcome, everybody. We're delighted to see you here. It's a gorgeous sunny day, which means it's hard to stay inside because this beautiful sunny weather isn't wanting it to be missed. But I'm happy to have you here and to welcome our speakers, Jenny Anders-Gable and Rebecca Smith. Jenny is Regional Counsel at Legal Services of Northern California and leads the firm's advocacy for older adults and disaster-related legal assistance. She works with Area 1 Agency on Aging offices throughout Northern California and specializes in the representation of older adults, including protecting and defending against elder abuse in all its forms. Rebecca is the managing attorney of the Redwood Regional Office of Legal Services of Northern California. The mission of Legal Services of Northern California is to provide quality legal services to empower the poor to identify and defeat the causes and effects of poverty within our community, efficiently utilizing all available resources. The legal services handles housing, public benefits, health, natural disaster, senior, and civil rights cases for eligible individuals. And now I'm going to turn it over to two of them to give their presentation today.
Thank you. I am going to share my screen so people can see our presentation.
And by the way, as you know, as usual, you can put your questions in the chat and of course, raise your hand throughout, but Rebecca will explain.
Okay, and then do you all see the correct?
Yes,
okay, perfect.
we
Excellent.
do.
Okay, thank you so much. Thank you for the introduction. Okay, so we kind of already went over. Oh well, I was gonna just mention. So we're fine with people like raising their hand or typing a question in the chat throughout the presentation, or just bringing it up. But we do have time at the end for questions. So if we're not getting through stuff, maybe we'll slow down on that. But you can ask questions as they come up. Okay, so Jane already went over what our mission is, but just some brief kind of background on Legal Services of Northern California. We provide assistance, as Jane mentioned, in various areas. So today we're going to be talking about a pretty specific specialized area related to elder abuse and scam related issues. But just so that you all know where we're coming from, we serve our clients in many different practice areas, including housing. So that can include helping make sure housing is accessible to individuals with disabilities, preventing eviction, preserving affordable housing. And then healthcare related issues, access to healthcare, timely care, things like that. Social Security, so preserving folks who receive Social Security benefits and addressing issues that they might have with their Social Security benefits. Public benefits, that includes cash aid, other welfare assistance, food stamps, CalFresh, and just making sure folks have access to that and addressing issues that they might face accessing and preserving those benefits. Natural disasters, it's Jenny's area. Jenny leads our firm's natural disaster related advocacy, but that includes kind of real-time responsiveness to disasters that usually impact individuals with the lowest means in the most severe ways. So helping people access emergency services that might be available, making sure people know about emergency services that might be available, and things like that. Our education practice includes helping folks who might usually children with special education or disciplinary questions. And then elder law, which includes, much of what this presentation is going to be about, but it's not in a vacuum. And oftentimes our clients are facing problems in multiple areas at the same time. And so we try to address as many as we're able to. And so the last two, post-conviction relief, that's often barriers that people might have to housing, employment, or licensing related to prior criminal convictions. And then our civil rights area includes, the rights of homeless folks, and that could be like towing issues, some naturalization, and immigration cases as well. And then one quick comment just before we get into this. So we're going to go over some general legal information here, but I know this is being recorded, but just to make clear, like nothing today is, we're not giving legal advice today. This is all general legal information. And just kind of a little lawyer disclaimer there. We can't answer super specific fact-based questions. This isn't a confidential environment, and people, it's a public event, and people may be, so don't share personal information if you have questions or comments. But we'll make sure the information for how to contact our office is included. And so LSNC's elder law practice is, again, Jenny's our leader in this area, and has a special focus on serving older adults, generally folks who are 60 or older. And that includes specialized education and outreach efforts like what we're doing today. Our elder law practice recognizes that there may be barriers to accessing our services that are unique for older adults, but includes all of the practice areas that I just went over. And then in addition, it has a special focus on some issues that are that older adults tend to face more severely than other groups. So preserving and accessing safe and affordable housing, accessing and maintaining responsive healthcare services, securing and preserving benefits and retirement income. That does include, we have a special pension practice, just to mention, where we have attorneys who are specialized in helping folks access pension benefits that they may be entitled to and not know it or not know how to access it. And so just a quick plug that's something we can assist with. And then what we're talking about today, which is preventing and addressing abusive practices or acts of financial or physical elder abuse, including neglect, predatory tactics, other harms that impact an individual's ability to maintain independence and safety in aging. Okay, and I'm going to turn it over to Jenny for the next couple slides.
Thanks, Rebecca, and hi everybody. So we're going to share with you some of the common scams that we see, or things that the way these issues arise for us. But definitely happy to hear from folks if there's any questions you have, or examples of the ways you've encountered this as well, or tips or hopes for different resources or whatever might come up. So very broadly speaking, I think we're going to mostly focus on financial scams today, like financial abuse. Again, we're looking at stuff that is mostly targeting older adults, although some of this can happen to anybody, of course. And we're going to be looking or talking about like the various ways that that these scams or acts might happen. And so who is causing the harm is an array of parties, and we see these cases arise in a bunch of different ways. Sometimes a community partner might make a referral to us, but a lot of times, we're helping somebody with a separate legal issue, and we'll realize that that our client or the person we're serving has been scammed or financially harmed in some way. And so it might be by a family member, it might be a child, or a spouse or a former spouse or sibling. A lot of the situations that we see concerning older adults, when families involved, oftentimes it is an adult child who is causing that harm or has caused some sort of financial harm in some way or another. It could also be different kinds of friends or acquaintances or neighbors. Maybe somebody who interacts regularly with our clients, whether they're a friend or whether they're the person who delivers certain services or goods, or just a variety of people who are involved in the person's life. Sometimes they're people who have always been around, and that kind of trust lends itself to allow somebody to maybe um, be more open, or not realize what the person or the bad actor in this situation is doing. But sometimes it's new friends, if you will, who pop up, or new people who come into the person's life who never existed before, and they're acting like a friend, or maybe a caregiver or somebody else, but they're also causing harm, or intend to cause harm. There's also fiduciaries, or other like paid services, people who can exploit or financially abuse an individual client, or a systemic, broader kind of uh, scams or practices that certain paid individuals might have, like a whole host of clients that they are um, tricking into signing up for services that they don't need, or managing their financial affairs, or a variety of examples where it's a much more coordinated effort. It's not like just the adult child who is causing harm to their parent. Similarly, like the strangers, that's kind of getting at like these really big, the stuff that you read in the papers or see on the news, the really big, high profile examples of sending you money overseas, or people who look at like obituaries to see who the recent widows are, and try to really target certain populations for either trying to access money, or trying to sell goods or services. Again, the variety of these kind of practices are all over the place, and it only seems to be on the rise. And again, the image here is that some of the different ways that these kind of tricks or efforts can play out, whether it's something that somebody receives in the mail, like the amount of junk mail that different age demographics receive. I've seen those kind of their statistics on it. It's like drastic what somebody in their 20s might receive, just unsolicited mail, versus like somebody in their 80s. And just the fact that so much of this kind of abuse and these kind of practices really are targeted on a certain demographic. So sometimes the stuff that comes in the mail a lot of it looks very believable, looks very real. It looks like a bill, or it looks like a great deal, or it looks like you won a prize, or you won some sweepstakes, and you're getting this stuff sometimes with real, sometimes with seals or emblems or familiar kind of logos that makes it seem like if I don't accept this, or if I do accept this, something good or bad will happen. And so there's a lot of targeted fraud that happens by mail, a lot of stuff by phone still. The telemarketing kind of stuff hasn't gone away. In fact, in some ways, with the artificial intelligence and AI, and some of like those kind of robocalls or other kinds of scams that reach people by phone might be increasing, or might even sound more believable than ever. And we'll talk a little bit about some of those examples. Anybody who has access to any sort of online life, whether that's through a computer or through your phone, whether you have an electronic presence, or an email really or do any online activity, online banking, is such a way that you're targeted, whether it's for accessing your finances, or trying to get you to buy a thing, or a lot of identity fraud, identity theft. Again, a lot of the stuff that happens online can impact anybody, but there are certain things that are really targeting certain demographics as well, where you see it more. And then TV, radio. So basically, like all of this stuff could be coming at an individual from a bunch of different ways, and it can sound very believable, or be, really easy to to wind up in a situation where you've signed up for something you didn't want, or you've sent money to somebody that you didn't realize that you've sent money to, or you've been scammed or harmed in some way. So that's the big picture lay of the land. You could advance the slide, Rebecca. I talked a little bit about this. I want to just say in California, we're not going to talk a lot about physical elder abuse today. That's usually something a little bit more understood or recognizable if somebody's being physically harmed or neglected. We're really focused on the scams, and just wanted to point out that in California, financial abuse for older adults, elder financial abuse, it's a thing, it's a crime. And so the way that's defined in California is the illegal or improper use of an elder's funds, property, assets. It could be any of the things that I've talked about earlier. It could also be like you're forging somebody's signature, you're cashing checks without their permission, you're otherwise using somebody's money or property, again, without their permission, without their consent, without their understanding of what you're doing. That includes if you've tricked somebody into consenting, that's not really full consent. Getting somebody to sign something that they don't know what they're signing, that may or may not be elder financial abuse. And so like knowing that that is, in California, that's a crime. That's something that as lawyers, like we're aware of that, those kind of protections, and using that as it's helpful for us to try to address or fix some of the different issues that we see in our casework. I feel like I talked about a lot of this, the way some of these scams come through the mail. The fake charities is kind of not an, we see that from time to time too. It sounds like you're donating money to something and it's really to like a person. What targets older adults a lot too are like sometimes some of the like come here for a free lunch, like investment seminars. Some of that stuff is real and you're getting a service, and they're not all scams, but there are certainly bad actors throughout our region who have done those, where they're not delivering like the good or their service, or they're offering something that's otherwise might be not needed for the person receiving it, or it's something that that person could have received for free somewhere else. Similarly, like some of the online dating, or the kind of tactics that focus on folks who have an online presence. Again, the stuff that you see in the news and in the papers sometimes, we've certainly had clients who were like sending people that they've been online dating money to try to get them to fly out to visit, because the girlfriend that they met online is going to come visit from North Carolina or wherever they are, and they just have to keep like sending money because like that flight was canceled or whatever it was. And again, we so rarely see these cases in our legal aid world where they come to us. No one's coming to us saying like, I was scammed because my girlfriend who I met online, took all my money and never showed up. It's usually oftentimes a community partner who's made the referral. It's somebody who was always paying their rent on time or always paying their mortgage on time and now's unable to do so. And that's where the legal problem comes up. And then we kind of dive in, or we hear this in some other way and we realize what has been happening. And those can be difficult, and they're not as uncommon as you might think. Similarly, the grandparent scam, like that one got a lot of press, which is really good, because I think a lot of people who may not have already heard of that, like became aware of it. And I've heard it's those of you who haven't heard of the grandparent scam, that's when it has happened mostly by phone, where somebody calls an older adult. Again, there's these lists of people by age, so they know the person they're calling is going to be an older person. They usually try to get like the widowed people. There's one person, there's no one around who you can like fact check this problem with. They call the older adult, they act like they're a grandchild and that they're in some sort of distress. They're incarcerated somewhere, they're stuck overseas somewhere. They just need you to wire them $2,000 and they'll be fine. It was very widespread for a while, but we still hear about it. So there's still some people doing it. The fun part is, I shouldn't say the fun part, but kind of fun part, that the way I hear about it the most now is usually from older adults telling me how they didn't fall for it. And so I'll be doing a presentation somewhere, and you know, people will share in that group, well, here's what I said when they called me, and it was not like, here's my money. And it's really only because it became so like well known that this was happening that people aren't just immediately sending that money, although uh, presumably plenty of people still do, and that's why they're still doing it. And it's still, um, again, especially with AI, where the ability to mimic other people's voices is becoming a lot better, it can sound very believable. And a lot of us would be really thrown off if somebody called us identifying as somebody we care about, and if we had the ability to, you know, financially help them a little bit. Sometimes we don't even have that ability. Like, our clients will, you know, take out a loan or use their credit card to do, you know, whatever is being asked of them on the other line. It can be very believable and very scary. Um, all the online stuff that we've already talked about, and then a lot of the door-to-door sales, which again, a lot of times that can be throughout a neighborhood, or sometimes it's really targeting people who have limited English proficiency, people who are older adults, whether they're trying to get you to upgrade your home with solar panels, or whether they're trying to sell you a $900 vacuum that you don't need. Like, those kind of examples that we've, you know, kind of heard about and have talked about almost for decades, really. That's all still real. There's protections in our state. um, a little bit of protections in our state for people who buy something that was sold to them on their front porch, and they want to undo that contract. They have a certain amount of days where they can cancel it if that was like how it was done. But most of the time, we don't see people in that magical window, although sometimes we do. A lot of times people are signing something on an iPad or something that doesn't feel like a signature. They don't really realize what they're doing, and they certainly don't understand what they just agreed to or signed up for. And it can create a lien on their property, or it can have them wind up with a product or a service that they didn't really want or intend.
We have a couple quick questions. And I think some of this we're going to get to, but one person in the chat wrote, so if there's a problem with this assisted living facility, do they come to our office, assuming they've already pointed this out at the facility? Do you want to answer that?
I can answer that, yeah.
Okay.
And I'm losing my voice, so I'm going to take drinks in between. It's like that time of year. Yes, the short answer is yes, and Rebecca, you can clarify if you want, but if there's a sort of thing where it seems like there might be some sort of abuse happening anywhere, whether it's in a facility or in a home, those are kind of cases that we would be happy to do an intake for and investigate whether there's something happening, or again, work with the individuals, work with individual community partners to see if there's a role for us to play. And so that those are kinds of cases that our organization you know, has gotten involved with. It really just depends on the scope or what the alleged abuse might be, but maybe.
Mhm. And then online notices of a payment due or confirmation of an order, what to do in those situations. And then kind of relatedly, it was how to identify fake email addresses, and when detected, what to do. And then I'll just say the last thing about sort of sharing personal information. We do get to some of that later with some of our preventative tips.
Yeah, it would be good to have like a really good like cheat sheet. I mean, as an organization, we have to go through these trainings ourselves because we're a law firm, and so everything we do has to be kept very confidential, which also means like, as we can't fall for any of these tricks, we can't like jeopardize our organization's technology or security. And so some of the tips that we learn in these annual trainings are actually really helpful. The ways that you spot fake email addresses, or you know, the phishing with the PH right there, the online phishing, that, you know, that's kind of, there's these efforts where they're trying to dupe you and trick you, and a lot of it looks very believable. And I mean, what we tell people who are our clients, or maybe our own family and friends, is like so little of it like so little of it is real. Like if you didn't sign up for a thing, if you don't know the person, but you're looking to see like if the online pages are secure, that little S in the top of the URL, that I feel like that's one thing that's kind of been circulated widely. But I think a key thing for if you're working with anybody, or for, for yourself, is if somebody is asking you for something by email and you've never interacted with, that person or that entity before by email, it's not somebody for sure, you trust for sure, no real confidential information should be shared back and forth by email. So if somebody sent you something and you really can't tell like if this is real or not, because it might be, you should try to call, and probably don't use the phone number that's in that email, but like go to find some other way to research, go to Google or some other way to look up that entity. Maybe you already have that entity's number, and call them and like, did you send me this request? Even if it feels weird, like it might be a colleague, or it might be, with some other entity or person that you engage with regularly, but like the email felt weird. Like it's better to like have an awkward conversation to confirm the email they sent than to respond to the email and, maybe open yourself up to like, now that now this bogus entity has my banking information, or whatever it might be, my passwords, or whatever it might be. And yeah, I think we probably get to some of this later, but you there's not many, and it's similar to what I just said. You really shouldn't be disclosing much of that information um to in those kind of like email ways, or kinds of ways that you haven't done before, particularly with that entity, to the extent you have trusted people in your lives, to the extent that maybe you've already made plans, maybe you've designated somebody to be your agent under a power of attorney. Maybe that's effective now, maybe that's effective someday down the road if you're not able to manage your affairs. Like it might be important to have that information like available to people you trust who can like help you, or who are helping you. But generally speaking, you've got to be really careful with where that information goes, and the mechanism that you're using to share it, because that's the kind of stuff that opens you up to these various practices that are really just, it feels like on the rise, and it's hard, I think it's becoming harder to detect what's real and what's not. um it's good questions. You could advance this slide too.
I've had the experience, by the way, that I get a number of emails saying a payment is due or whatever have you, or you notice that your payment is due on PayPal for buying Bitcoin. I made the mistake of calling the number. Never call the number, just delete as a scam the whole thing. Because if you don't have there was a whole PayPal scam going around like that. And now I look at the email address to see if it's a real email address. It has X's and O's and numbers and things all scattered. Don't go there, just delete it. And if somebody manages to get hold of your computer for some reason or another because you followed up, disconnect your computer. Just turn off the and they will lose control of your computer. So it's really useful to, as she said, basically never, if you don't know who it's coming from, get rid of it.
Yeah, and sometimes even if you do know who it's coming from, but to your point, like if you actually look at the full email address, you might have my name, Jennifer Anders, and then if it said at, and then it has like weird stuff, like Jane said, like the X's or O's, or just stuff that doesn't make sense, and you don't always see that right away unless you open it all up to look. Those are kind of the clues that like part of it, usually about half of it, looks somewhat legitimate, but then if you kind of look a little bit closer, it's like, oh no, that's not quite right. But yeah, PayPal got me too, and Not in that Bitcoin way, but somebody actually did hack into my PayPal account, and it took me like 6 months to try to get them to just completely. I don't want any part of PayPal. Completely get me out of this. Deactivate it. It's really hard to stay on top of that and to fix these problems once they happen.
Well, yeah, and I've gotten charges against my credit card because I've donated to political organizations, but all of a sudden the same guy showed up with two different having put a charge on my credit card. Same guy, two different email addresses that he was responding to. And of course, I had to deal with the credit card company saying, excuse me, that isn't me. And so they will take care of it. But on the other hand, you have to be alert to that, because if you aren't watching your credit cards, you can end up with all kinds of things you didn't mean to sign up for.
Yeah. Yep, that's exactly right. Um, Kind of on that note, being as far as like the credit card stuff goes, like being on top of your bills, like in monitoring that, you would probably notice a significant charge, but you might not notice some of those smaller ones that come through if you're not monitoring. Um, or I mean, what we see a fair amount, and I think we talk about this maybe a little bit later too, is a lot of people were helping, one of the spouses was the main person managing the bills, and that person passes away, and now there's somebody else who's managing the finances, and they haven't, they don't know what's an ordinary or unordinary expense or bill. But this slide here is to just give anybody and everybody the ability to kind of identify clues, or not necessarily for yourself, but like for other people that you might be encountering, who maybe has experienced something along these lines, maybe has um, been harmed by one of these scams. Sometimes they're very significant. They can be something that takes tens of thousands of dollars out of somebody's savings or retirement accounts. For the people we're helping, that's usually all that they have. And in general, a lot of people don't really talk about their finances with others. It's not something like as a society that we're all sitting around talking about, like the money in our bank or what we're doing. And so it can make it kind of uncomfortable sometimes to check in on people about these kind of issues, and it can make anybody feel like, oh my gosh, this happened to me. This is like so embarrassing. This is horrifying. I'm somebody who should know better, and yet this happened, and I'm not going to tell anybody about it. But again, we see this because a lot of times other problems will arise, and so things to pay attention for is if maybe somebody hasn't been paying bills, especially if somebody routinely paid their bills on time, didn't have trouble making those payments. If there's any unusual purchases or financial activity, um, if you're involved in a person's like more daily life, and you notice some of like their valuables are missing, whether that's jewelry or sometimes like entire vehicles or things no longer exist, um, whether sometimes that's because somebody has come into their lives and has taken it, or has talked them into giving it to them. Again, the new friends or helpers who, hopefully they're really friends and helpers, but not always. Anyone who's made significant changes to their estate planning, to maybe their wills or the powers of attorney. Some of that could be all good and ordinary, but sometimes that's some of the big abusive practices too, especially with an older age demographic, is getting somebody to add you to their will, or to give you the power to be an agent under a power of attorney, and then that kind of opens up your ability to do a lot of things, for better or and for worse, and in these kind of cases it's the for worse that we're focused on. The money wiring is like the big, like the big examples, the ones that feel and sound so terrible. You hear like somebody's wired, tens of thousands of dollars to wherever. They've borrowed money against their credit card to do it, or they cashed out their 401k, or, again, a lot of times we're not talking about people who have a ton of resources, and you think, well, who's going to try to financially abuse somebody who only has social security income, but there's ways that they're able to tap into, getting these lines of credit, maxing out credit cards, or the little nest eggs that people do have. And to the extent that it's a demographic that has worked for some of these bigger scams, that's how that actually plays out. And so it's not like just targeting the millionaire retirees at all. It's in fact very much anybody who they can access. And then the other thing that we see, and again, that gets our clients our way sometimes, or that we notice even in our other case handling, is somebody who ordinarily did certain things, had certain activities, looked a certain way. Any sudden changes to that could be they're experiencing something like this, or have experienced some sort of abuse along these lines. And it might be the person involved, the bad actor, or the person who's causing the harm has caused this, or it could just be all the stress from the situation has just kind of caused the person to check out of their ordinary day-to-day kind of routines. You could go ahead.
I think a lot of this we're going to get to, but one question was about vetting people who are helping with tech support. Do you have information that might be useful? I think a lot of the same information you already provided. I will say sometimes with those scams, just like not normally, you should be calling. You should be the caller. So if someone's calling you saying, "Hey, your computer is malfunctioning, like let me remote access," that's a huge red flag. And so making the call yourself can actually be and trying to verify the number can be on its own like fairly protective for those types of scams. But do you have anything to add, Jenny?
No, that's a good point. Is that, if you're having a problem, you reaching out or doing research on who to hire or to have help you, um, is less likely to result in somebody who's trying to, take advantage of the situation than people who are proactively, reaching out to you, especially any of the kind of pop-up ads or emails or things that you get online. Like a lot of that, like you should be very skeptical of. And really, like in the perfect world, you're talking to your friends or family or people and trust, who have already like had, this computer guy was great, and it worked out well, and have real life experiences, versus the people who are trying to solicit your business. But yeah, that's actually a really good question. And I see there's some other do you see the other questions in the chat?
Yeah, so
Okay.
one of them was about protecting yourself online. I think we kind of addressed that. And then one is explaining problems with cash cards available at grocery stores,
Oh yeah.
and situations with caregivers, which I think we're so if you want to address those, Jenny, that'd be great.
Well, I the cash cards, I'm guessing you mean the gift cards, which is basically, I've learned, don't buy them at grocery stores. There's a huge, especially, this is actually really good. How timely is this announcement before the holidays? Which, like, um apparently, like if you want to buy the Starbucks gift card from Target, not a great idea. Go to Starbucks directly to buy the gift card, because what they're doing, like when you go to Target or any grocery store, and they have the wall of gift cards that you can get to any restaurant or online retailer, very, very convenient, like one-stop shop for gift cards. Um, and this came out, I think, I mean, I think it was really kind of publicized last holiday season, which people were basically taking the money off of those cards. And so the consumer, you would go and you would buy the card for $25 and give it to your grandchild, and they would go to use it, and there'd be no money on it, because the scammers had already basically cleared those. And so when there are gift cards that are just sitting out, they're more prone to have that happen, versus, you're getting them directly from the retailer, they're kept behind the counter, they're being scanned, you see the person loading it directly. That's generally not going to be able to fall for these scams, where they're kind of taking all of them in advance, pulling all the money off and then putting them back on there, and you wind up buying these empty cards, which is just so terrible. Um, and then yeah, the caregivers, those are tragic because what we need is more people being offering caregiving services. A lot of people want to age in their homes, want to age in place, and the only way for some people for that to be physically or or financially even feasible is to have somebody come in to help with certain things. And then it's really rough when the person who's supposed to be helping you, you trust them, you're paying them, and they wind up being the person who can be causing significant harm, whether it's neglecting you or isolating you from your family, or again getting added to your bank account or to your will or whatever it can be. Like we've definitely seen those, and they're hard, they're tough. Financial concerns check. Do you want to do this one, Rebecca?
Sure, yeah. So this is kind of a part of the practical side, and we have some more practical tips and information later on. But this is kind of just a sort of example questions or flags you might see, and just as like an introductory acknowledgement, financial skills are often the first to decline, often with older adults who are maybe starting to age and have some memory or cognitive decline. This is a normal part of aging. And it's important to talk about that and acknowledge that it's just true. We should plan for it. We should expect it. And so because we know that there's like science and studies about financial skills and management being like some of the very earlier things that people have trouble managing. And as we just went over some of the very significant consequences of when individuals are taken advantage of through a scam, through someone that they trust, the consequences can be huge. Maybe they lose control of their bank accounts. Maybe they, wire a bunch of money to a scammer. And so trying to identify early signs and then implementing some preventative and protective measures can make a big impact and also prevent more serious and harder to solve problems later. So to state the obvious, it's a lot easier to try to prevent having the wiring all your money, investing all your money in a fake online Bitcoin account or something, than it is to try to claw that money back. And so these are problems that once they've happened can be really devastating and difficult to remedy on the financial side, especially. So some questions to think about for yourself or friends or family, or if your service provider, maybe clients that you deal with, is are you having any of these concerns, trouble paying bills because they're confusing? Maybe don't feel confident making big financial decisions alone. Especially if these are changes, but maybe having not really having any money at the end of the month, giving loans or gifts that you can't afford. Again, especially if that's a shift in behavior, right? Children or others asking for money, people calling, asking for money in lotteries, finding those calls maybe persuasive or confusing, or someone that's, accessing an account and money is disappearing. So some of those are like, you'd be surprised what people will share if you ask. I think oftentimes these questions just aren't asked, especially in truly, unfortunately, the trusting relationships are also a common place for abuse. But with the goodwill and the honest intentions of those, like having those conversations among family can make a big difference. And we'll go into some of the other preventative measures in the next slide.
Thank you. Yeah, we'll talk about this here. I think it comes up in another slide too. So generally, like Rebecca just said, ideally we can prevent these kind of things. Some of it is preventable, like sometimes the education and the understanding does work, like the example I gave with the grandparent scams. Like a lot of people are like I'm not falling for this, or one person was so happy to talk to me about how she kept the person on the phone for like an hour, and her goal was like, I figured if he's talking to me for an hour, like that's probably 10 less people he's not going to reach. Not like everybody can do that or wants to spend an hour talking to somebody who's ultimately trying to steal your money. But it's like evidence that sometimes trying to get like that kind of preventative education out there does work. There are certain things like especially some of this online stuff, even if you knew all the tips and tricks, again, sometimes it's just a click of a button that can make a difference or open you up to some of the fraud, and some of it is harder to prevent. Um, but the other ways like to prevent or to kind of safeguard, if you will, your financial affairs. A lot of times, like having your money directly deposited might be safer than coming through the mail, than having checks sent through the mail, or having to rely on other people to help get you somewhere to cash checks. You won't have that third party there to like intercept or to possibly steal or fraudulently sign over checks. Sometimes people change their credit limits, or you do that as you age or as your finances change. It's like, I don't need to have this much credit available to me, so I'm going to like request that my card limits are lowered, because um, I'm never going to be able to, really repay a $20,000 credit card debt anyway. So I don't want my limit to be that high. And by limiting your credit in different ways, you're limiting the ability for yourself or to others to exploit that, or to cause harm. Similarly, you can be proactive. You have some concern, or somebody recently did something bad using your information, you can freeze your credit completely so that neither yourself or others can open any new lines of credit, take any new loans, do any new major transactions under your name. Um, you can execute or loop in people who you trust, maybe as an agent under a power of attorney. I see in the chat there's a similar question, like, should we have a fiduciary as a trustee or co-executor? um, like that could be a really good option for some people, especially if they don't have like trusted people in their lives. And it's there's a lot of people who don't, a lot of people don't have children, or you don't have a spouse, or you don't have a spouse anymore, you don't have siblings. It's like, I don't really know who that person would be. Or maybe you do have some of those people around, but you also, and they might be wonderful people, but you're also like, yeah, I'm not really sure that they can do these things. That's all fine. It might be a situation where, yeah, sure, maybe you have a fiduciary do that. Although for a lot of people, like a fiduciary acting in that role will cost money. And so for a lot of people with limited resources, it's like they couldn't afford to have that fiduciary involved if their monthly income is only $1,500 a month and they have very limited resources. And so it kind of just depends on an individual situations, but that having somebody or having some plan in place, whatever that looks like for you, is generally better than not having any plan in place. um, and then briefly, like if and when you do encounter somebody or come across a situation where there has been some sort of scam or abuse, or exploitation or something that has happened, there's different things to do depending upon what the problem was. You might again, to the extent it's a crime, which I said earlier, most of these kind of abuses could be a crime against an older adult specifically. You could report it to the police. You might need to like get your bank involved if your bank was, if your finances or your bank accounts were involved in whatever the harm was. It might be a report to Adult Protective Services. Again, if it's one of these big uh, fraudulent, like wire money wiring schemes or something where you've sent money abroad, looping in the FBI. They take reports, all of those things. I talked about the freezing and closing accounts as a preventative thing that can also be a way to correct issues that have happened. Um, and we'll talk a little bit about some of this, I think, in a slide or two later. So you can skip this or go to the next slide, Rebecca. Of no great surprise, when this has happened to somebody, it can impact a variety of areas of somebody's life. So it's not just like, oh, I'm out this money, but sometimes it can impact their housing. Sometimes whatever has happened will create some sort of instability. Whether they're a homeowner, it might create something that that makes it impossible or difficult for them to remain housed. Similarly, for tenants, depending upon what the bad actor has done, it can impact their ability to remain a tenant. Again, a lot of the ways we see these cases usually are one of those ways. Somebody is at risk of being evicted if they're a tenant, or they're at risk of losing their home if they're a homeowner, because of something that the person who's caused the harm or the abuse has done. We also see this in almost all of these cases, where somebody's health care or health, mental or physical health is impacted. And similarly, we have seen when, if and when the problem is resolved or fixed, and especially if, we're able to restore some of the harm, we see how somebody's health improves, how somebody is actually like able to sleep at night again, or no longer afraid, or whatever that kind of toll that has been taken on somebody's health has been. And then of course, just like somebody's, and you can see how these are all related. Somebody's financial stability or instability is going to impact their health and their housing. But to the extent that the people who are causing harm is impacting somebody's ability to access or maintain their sources of income or other finances, we see this in most of these cases as well, including bad actors who, or a lot of times these are the family members who are encouraging our clients to sign up for benefits that they might not be eligible for, or things along those lines as well. You could go to the next slide. This slide is really like what our organization, or how we're legal aid. All of the services we provide are provided without charge. I don't know if that was addressed earlier. Maybe that should have been the starting point. Is we're a nonprofit law firm, so everything we do is for free. So this is how we can help, or even other lawyers can help. It's just hard to get a lawyer's attention usually, to try to fix some of these. And I think we've stressed this a lot already earlier, but really we try to do a lot of stuff like this, or community education, know your rights kind of events and outreach to try to prevent as much of this as possible. We also help people prepare some of the financial documents that we talked about, advanced healthcare directives or powers of attorney, things where you can think about what might happen to you if you're no longer able to manage your financial affairs, and whether there's people that you do trust to help you out. And if there's not, like, that's fine. You shouldn't make something up. But if there is, it would be good to get that in place so that you don't become susceptible to, these people who come in, whether they're the caregivers or whoever they might be, who are really looking particularly for isolated older adults. And we also get involved in these cases from a legal standpoint, as we come across them or people come to us. There's elder abuse restraining orders that we can use that can help prevent or get some of these acts to stop, or to help get some of the people who are causing the abuse to stay away from the older adult that they're harming. We might bring a lawsuit in some of these cases, or sue, if that's necessary. But the goal in any of the legal services we do, whether we're giving advice or otherwise investigating or considering restraining orders, is to really try to get our older adult client to some sort of safe situation, where they're no longer experiencing the abuse, and to the extent we can unwind or unravel some of the bad acts that have already happened, we get involved with that as well. and then like long term, like I just said, like cleaning up all that stuff. It might also mean we're like now executing new legal documents because maybe the power of attorney that your son had you sign, you actually didn't want him to be the agent, and so maybe we're revoking those documents that helped cause the harm, and helping to get you set up in a more sustainable way to prevent this really from happening again. And a lot of times that means we're working with community partners and others to try to create, a situation where somebody is set up where they're less likely to have somebody come in and have this happen again. They have the supports they need to remain safe in their house, and have the trusted people around them to try to prevent this from happening again. For the next slide. Where I think we've talked about some of this already. And I know we're running out of time. What do you want to chime in, Rebecca?
I mean, I guess the only thing I would mention on this one, I think we've addressed it a lot, mostly, but it's just, and we might kind of get into this in the, our next slide, we'll talk about kind of a case example to show kind of how these issues come up in our services. But just that, like, we all have very different roles, and as lawyers, our role is very client centered and confidential. And I always just point this out because these issues, the way that we see them play out when we're meeting with a client, maybe about something that's totally unrelated, they're not always they're not always very black and white. They're usually not. Oftentimes it's like I said, a trusted family member who might be causing the abuse or exposing the older adult to harm, and our client may not be ready to file a restraining order that's generally quite extreme, and would be a court order that prevents them from having contact with maybe their child, and so these are the legal remedies that are available, unfortunately in some ways don't fully address the complexity of these problems, and how they manifest for folks. And I just like to acknowledge that, and also mention that, like, we would, even if we thought someone was being abused, we would not take some action that a client didn't ask us to do in an informed way. And there are, we mentioned like adult protective services, and there's some other agencies, for example, that may be mandated reporters to something, and that's just a very different role than the one that we take. And so I just like to kind of contextualize that a little bit.
By the way, you have until 1:30.
Oh, great, thank you.
You're welcome.
So we've talked like generally about how we've seen some of these cases, but we thought we would share an example of one, because sometimes it can help to actually understand all of this with a story. And I think it seems like a lot of the folks who are here today, you've probably encountered some of these issues, have heard these stories too. This is a client who who came to us like from a community partner. She probably would have never found us on her own. She had limited English proficiency. She didn't have online access. She wouldn't have known like that legal services even would exist. She was 81 years old. She lived by herself in a pretty modest townhome that she happened to own outright. She had sold her house that she lived in for decades, downsized to a small townhouse. Um, so she was very lucky to own that housing, but she was otherwise very low income. A very very small Social Security was her only monthly income. But she was able. It was fine for her again because she was fortunate to own that housing, and didn't have lived very modestly, didn't have significant expenses, um, and so like that was her life at one point, and that was good, and that was working for her. And then she had a pretty routine hospitalization. It wasn't anything significant, although she was there for a few days, and the hospital didn't want to release her on her own because she needed like a little bit of extra help for a couple weeks. And on their own, without asking her, had contacted her daughter, who she had in her files somewhere. Uh, and she had only one daughter, so the hospital contacted her daughter to tell her what was going on. And I think the daughter actually ended up coming to the hospital after that had happened, and really trying to get uh, her daughter to look after her, or to to help in some way upon her release. What they didn't know is that our client and her daughter had a terrible relationship, had a history of the daughter being very abusive toward her. There had been restraining orders in the past. The daughter had physically and financially harmed her in the past, and it had actually been a few years that since they had seen each other until this hospitalization incident. Um, and I think partly because it had been a few years since they had seen each other, when the daughter showed up and said, "Sure, I'll look after mom for a little bit." The alternative that was presented to our client in the hospital bed was like, you need some extra help. So, like, if you don't have someone at home to help you out you'll probably have to go recover in some sort of facility for a couple weeks. And so she was very eager to go home, and it's like, okay, sure, my daughter can help out. She was like hopeful that things would be good between them, and it didn't seem like a significant risk at that point. However, once she got home, what had wound up happening is that her daughter, who was very behind on her own rent, was very financially struggling, moved herself and her teenage child into her mom's home. That was not ever part of the agreement. She thought the daughter would just be helping for a little bit, so she moved herself into the home. And less than a week after she was released from the hospital, the daughter took the mom to a notary to notarize several legal documents, including a power of attorney, and an advanced healthcare directive. And also, the big deal was a deed. And it was a deed that transferred the home from our client to her daughter. What our client thought she was signing that day was a new will that would leave the home to her daughter when she died, because the daughter says, like, we're moving in to take care of you. Um, y- like, I don't know how, can willing to give me this home when you die? In your will, we need to update your will. You were just in the hospital. It's a good time to update your will. Our client, again, who doesn't speak a lot of English and doesn't read any language, trusted that what she was signing was a will. Like, that's it. Like, when I die, it goes to my daughter. That's fine. I'll be dead, was her words, not mine. And um, so that happens. And within days of that happening, what the daughter then did was take away her phone, um, turned off the cable, which watching TV was a significant part of our client's day. So she turned off the cable so she could no longer watch TV. She basically had her locked up in a room where she couldn't routinely get out. She wasn't able to go to church or do a lot of the things that she ordinarily did. And there, when she started to, like, talk, try to like defend herself, try to get out, try to leave the house, there was physical abuse. She wound up in the hospital because of some of that physical abuse. There were different times that the police were called to come out because she had like tried to make phone calls or tried to call the police. When the police would come out, the daughter, who spoke very good English and our client did not, would say like she has dementia, she's fine, she doesn't know what she's doing. Kind of went the same way when there would be these interactions at the hospital. And it really took it took our client getting out to go pay like a routine um bill. Like, she did a lot of her she managed a lot of her affairs in person. I think a lot of that was because of the language barrier. It was easier for her to interact with people in person than by phone. And so she went to make her annual insurance payment in person, which she had this same agent for like 15 years. So they had a pretty friendly relationship. And something about that interaction um, caught the insurance agent's attention. And again, this is like kind of spotting the things that are off in the people that you're interacting with. And in that interaction, like the agent like knew a little bit about like the past history she had had with the daughter, but didn't really know too much. And something about it led her to think, I should double check um I should double check things, because she had also heard from the daughter like a week before, here's a power of attorney, don't talk to my mom anymore, she has dementia, she doesn't know what she's talking about. Also, like, she shouldn't be able to do anything with these insurance policies. And so there was like all sorts of red flags, and she checked the status of our client's home and realized at that time that the home had transferred to the daughter. That was how our client learned about that. She had no idea that that had happened. And kind of like, long story short, in the course of all that was going on and all that our client was uncovering, like bills that weren't being paid, like our client was always paid her bills on time, and now she wasn't on title, and so like she had problems with the homeowners association, she had problems with her electricity bill and her cable bill and all these bills that were delinquent in her name, and she couldn't do much because she was no longer the legal homeowner. um, it was kind of like everything was falling apart at the same time, while she was like truly afraid of both the daughter and the grandson, because both had become abusive toward her. And she didn't have access to like her money or to anything anymore. Again, so this case came to us after all that had happened, and we were able to go to court and file a lawsuit, or to try to fix the title issue. But in doing that, we were kind of able to um, after it took a very long time, but restore all of those pieces that had fallen apart, including getting restraining orders against the child and the grandson who had been abusive toward her, and eventually being able to get her back in her home, get the title back in her name, keep them out of her lives, like restore her credit, and all these like property taxes and all these issues that had transpired over that time. But it was just really an example of, this person was very, uh, was very isolated, had very, it was very easy for the daughter to come in and pretty quickly take over control of a bunch of things. And really, if it wasn't for that one interaction with the insurance agent, um, I don't know if or when or how this would have, come to light, because I mean, again, the police were involved and the hospital was involved, and all these other checkpoints that could have caught it that missed it, because the daughter did such a good job presenting as somebody who was, just trying to take care of her mom. And her mom is this older person who, barely speaks English, and has some limitations or cognitive issues. And so therefore she was painted as this person who just wasn't credible. And we worked with this client for years, and she was always very consistent and kind, and kept, like, very much understood what was happening, and very much understood what she wanted and didn't want. And I mentioned earlier the impact that these cases can have on somebody's health. It was like, it was night and day. With You could feel the weight relieved from this person the day we were actually able to get the home back in her name. And so this is a kind of an extreme example, but also not out of the ordinary example of things lining up just right, and then kind of knowing when to intervene, and the role that a variety of service providers or partners can play in trying to help prevent or address these kind of issues. Uh,
Okay. I don't know if there's questions about that one. Oftentimes there are, but we only have a few more, and then we should have some time for questions as well. But Oops, I didn't mean to advance again. Okay, so we have some practical tips. So, unfortunately, what happened in this Ms. Rose's case is, like Jenny said, sort of extreme, but not out of the ordinary. But I just want to also mention, like, we unfortunately would not be able to do what we did for Ms. Rose for every client. We just don't have the resources to do that. And that's kind of why we want to talk about, like, trying to prevent these things from happening before they're problems that are really hard to undo. Which in her case, it was title had been of her home had been transferred. There was, documents notarized, which, also just as a comment, I think there's often a misconception that having things notarized is really protective, but a notary is not a mandated recorder, and generally their role is just to confirm the person sitting before them is who they say they are, and really very little beyond that. And so that notary, in this case, had no, clearly did not inquire further, but also had no real obligation to, just needed to confirm that she was who she was. And so I just mentioned that because I think sometimes, we see people come to us with really suspect powers of attorney or something, and they make a big deal about them being notarized. And I just like to point out that that's really doesn't carry with it the protection that often people think it does. Anyway, so I wish we could, but we just don't have the resources to do that kind of case for every client that really deserves to have that kind of thing done, done for them and undone for them when they've suffered in that kind of way. And so that's why it's important to try to implement protective measures and practical tips. One which has kind of come up a few times in our time together is, getting more comfortable talking about planning for the future, including capacity issues and money management. And that can include, when providing services to older adults or in general in your own personal life or with family and friends. There's a moment that it becomes too late to make meaningful capacity and estate plans, because you have to have, capacity in various levels depending on what action you're trying to take, in order to make those plans. And so it necessarily sort of has to be something that happens in a preventative and advanced way, and not once it's too late. So to be more explicit, once someone already has significant memory decline or something, and may not really have the capacity, as in the ability to kind of understand what they're doing and why, may not be able to do the preventative stuff, which there may still be some options, but they're usually more difficult and more traumatizing and burdensome for the individual and their family. Next, communicating directly with the individual seeking services. This is something our office will always do, and I think it's also an important thing for other entities to do. So in our case example, Jenny mentioned that this individual was in the hospital, was clear and consistent in her wishes, throughout the course of our office's representation, but was various service providers were, police officers who responded when she called for help, and nurses or whoever was trying to kind of figure out what to do when she was in the hospital, totally overlooked what she herself was saying, maybe because of time constraints or something with the language barrier. But for whatever those reasons, like, much of the problems, may have been prevented by serious inquiry and listening to what she herself was saying. Asking questions and reducing stigma related to scams. Scams are so widespread. I think there's been some comments about this in the chat about how AI has proliferated scams and made them more persuasive. I think it can feel really embarrassing for folks, who fall victim to these scams. But once you start talking about it, and in many of our presentations like this or others, you start hearing from people, and it's either them or they know someone. It's very, very widespread, and like the grandparent one, talking about it can both reduce stigma and actually meaningfully reduce the likelihood of being the victim of these scams, because you might know what to look out for, and that has kind of happened with that grandparent one, in a very positive way. And this is a slide with some local resources. Like I mentioned, we all have various different roles. And so someone I think asked at some point if the Senior Resource Center would be able to help with getting like credit freezes. I don't know specifically about that question, but that's definitely something that like a community resource center may be able to do. I will say that that's tying into this other question that was just inputted, which is responsibilities that banks have. Talking to your bank, putting notes on the account, putting, a signer on the account if appropriate, lowering a credit limit, for protective reasons, may, directly with the bank can be ways to do that. Your bank should have a way to ask that a card is, or a credit line is frozen. This is outside of really what we do, but there are law firms that look at that type of liability. So when banks, for example, like advertise, like we protect, our seniors accounts and like have security measures in place for scams. So a few years ago, I was at a conference and there was this like consumer protection attorney, which is talking about some work that he does in that area. So basically it's like, tracing liability to a bank where their member might make the same transactions and have really consistent spending history. And then all of a sudden, in 3 days they come in and make, withdraw all of their money, or, request some wire transfer, and that the bank who advertises as, having protections in place, basically lets it happen. I think there's some fairly recent legal changes. I don't know, Jenny, if you know them off the top of your head, but related to like wait times for some transactions. Jenny, do you?
I don't know that off the top of my head, but banks are mandated reporters for any potential abuse. So a lot of the bigger banks have like stuff worked into their systems to put flags when there's an unusual transaction, because they have been for years now, mandated reporters, and they it seems like they take that seriously and have been doing a fairly good job, in the cases that we see. We certainly aren't experts at what all the banks are doing, but the short answer is, yeah, if banks are noticing something unusual for, again, whether for an older adult's account or banking activities, and it might, it might be that somebody is using or accessing their funds, or there's unusual transactions, it might rise to a level that would require them to make a report of suspected financial elder abuse.
I think you've done a great presentation. Does anybody else have questions? I think you've handled everything that's in the chat. Any other thoughts, concerns?
If anyone has questions, just, you can unmute yourself or type them in the chat. But this last slide just has the information on how to reach our local office here in Eureka. And so, feel free to reach out to us with specific questions. If we're not able to help with a specific case or someone's not eligible, we'll always try to find a referral or give some community information about someone that might be able to help. It sounds like someone might have had a question.
I want to thank you. Oh, you have something.
Yeah, I was wondering if there was any effort to educate the hospital and our police officers when they're called. I had an incident once when I was a power of attorney and the relatives locked me out. I sat on the curb for an hour waiting for the police officer. He spent 5 minutes with me and about 40 minutes with them, and then came out and told me we would have to learn to get along. I then had to go get legal help, and eventually the relatives were evicted and the fellow was protected. But that was quite a while ago. But I wonder if the hospital had not called the daughter without consulting the patient, and if the police officers know, that they may get a story from somebody if they're being interviewed without the other person's input. If they're being taught how to interview people on those calls, because I know those calls do happen.
No.
Yeah, I mean, again, I'm not a police officer and I don't work in a hospital, but it's our, there's required trainings that all of those professionals have. But it's clear that, that we know that stuff doesn't always go according to plans or protocols, and all of it is only as good as, the people in the moment who are familiar with these kind of issues execute it all. And so a lot of police do receive, like, some, not a lot, of training about elder abuse, for example. But to the extent that it's not a lot, then I think at the end of the day, you have humans who have whatever biases and, opinions and things that they have. And that's where, yeah, I think hearing these kind of examples and stories of situations where it has gone wrong can be helpful, because for most of us, you have one interaction like what you just experienced, or like the story that we just shared. And sometimes it only takes that one personal, story or example where it's like, oh, I'll never take that shortcut again. And so I think, like, it doesn't matter if they're sitting in a training where, they're forced to be there to have their 1 hour about elder abuse, or whatever it is. But recognizing the harm that can come when they don't do things according to a certain protocol, I think is very helpful. And the hospital thing, that example, that kind of stuff, I don't think usually happens in that kind of way. That was kind of extreme, although it's also like getting consent from somebody who's hospitalized is also tricky too, depending upon how much somebody's able to understand what they're even being told. Um, but to the extent that you can flag in your own records people you do and don't want involved in your medical care is really important. And those kind of people and wishes change over time. And so that's another thing that we advise our clients is to keep that kind of information updated, because all of it is also only as good as anyone out there knows.
Yeah, that was a decade or more ago. So I was hoping that I would hear that there's more training going on now than maybe was happening then. So I do hope it's improved.
Rowetta, you had a question?
Yes, I was recently scammed, believe it or not, and it was the grandparent one by a granddaughter. And AI are so, I mean, they're so technical with everything. They must have researched, they had her voice down pat. You couldn't tell the difference. And it wasn't just a blurb. And then we interacted back and forth. And of course, she was in jail and she needed funds to get her bail out. And she gave me a number to call because for her public defender. And the number that I got, the first 6 digits were correct, but I never paid attention to the last ones when I answered the call. And she said, well, she really, please call this public defender, da 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 da. And so I hung up. I tried to call her. Of course, when it would not go through because her mailbox was full and I couldn't leave a message or anything. And so I finally did call this supposed public defender back. And yes, anyway, she was asking for quite a bit of money. And I asked, well, why is it so high? Well, we checked her record. It's just perfect, no blemishes, this and that. The judge actually reduced it down, da 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 da, given the big story. And then I said, well, that's still pretty high. And she says, well, she hit a lady that was pregnant. She's 6 months pregnant. And if the baby dies, then there's going to be a lawsuit. And she just kept going on and on. It was unbelievable. And she had the mannerisms down when my supposed granddaughter called. It was just like that. And then she came back later and said, oh, well, I told your granddaughter that you had contacted me, and she started crying again, just like she would do. Yeah, it was just unbelievable how much they had down the information on our family and what they were saying. And actually, I ended up giving the money, and a car came up and picked it up. She said, oh, well, you can make a deposit this one place in Eureka, da da da. She called back later and said, well, I can send a messenger for you if you'd like. And that way you don't have to make a trip into Eureka. And yes, and it was bad. And I didn't hear back from her for another day. I'd left a couple messages, never could get through. And she said, oh, well, it's too late now after she had the money. We can't give her her cell phone back because it's after hours. So she's going to have to come back tomorrow morning to get her cell phone. I mean, they just, I couldn't believe all that they said. But yeah, so you got to be the sheriff. I did make a report, and they said they are getting so
Sophisticated.
yes, and we're thinking our family now. You know, families need to have a magic word or a code or something. So if somebody calls and it sounds like your relative, just ask them what's the magic word or whatever. And if they don't know it, then just hang up on them. But anyway, it's terrible. They are so sophisticated in what they're doing. And yeah. Yes, a lot more went on than that. But anyway, that's the basics. So you really, really need to be aware. It sounds exactly like her, you know, the mannerisms. It's not like it's just a recording because we were interacting back and forth. And then she said, well, Grandma, I can't talk long. She gave me the number, write this number down. And I knew because I'd worked at the correctional facility before that they only allow them so much time. She said, because I don't have that much time to talk. And so, yes, so I was scammed big time. I need to let more people know that the sheriff said there's so much of it going on in Humboldt County now. It's just unbelievable.
Yeah, it is. And that's why I wanted to do this particular presentation, because people aren't aware of how sophisticated it is, how practice. A lot of people are making a living doing this kind of stuff.
Oh, yeah.
And we need to get the word out as much as possible. And by the way, Jenny, I'd appreciate if you'd send me a copy of the slides. But I want to thank you and encourage you to continue doing this kind of thing, because people need to be aware literally of the specific examples of what can happen, just like Rowetta said. And
is it possible to get a copy of the slides that you presented? Because I'm going to be attending a couple other functions and I'd like to let my women's group know about it because they're elderly like myself.
Is that okay, Rebecca? Jennifer?
Yeah, we can provide the slides. They're not the full picture, as you know. There's a lot of context and stuff we talked about. So you can always provide them our office information, even just to call and ask, when there might be another presentation. We hold quarterly estate planning like clinic events with the Senior Resource Center and things like that. But yeah, we can share the slide deck.
It might be useful to make a little compendium of stories.
Yeah.
So people have some concept of exactly how to recognize them, what kinds of emails, what they look like, what to do when you get one. It's because it is ongoing. It's doing nothing but getting worse.
Yes,
So I want to
absolutely.
thank you all for coming. I want to thank you for presenting. It's very important. And let everybody know that next week on the 17th, we're going to have a talk on living with landsides, examples from the North Coast region. And also that on this Saturday, we're having the OLLI Open House, our 20th year celebration from 3 to 5 at the Cape Buchanan Room on campus. Free parking, obviously, on Saturdays. So we ideally you'd make a reservation. I don't think you have to. We're just trying to get some handle on how many people are coming. And if you want to come and bring a friend, do that too. If you haven't signed up for the OLLI news, you can just go to humboldt.edu/OLLI and get information on that activity and event. And if you don't get the OLLI newsletter, which tells you what's coming up, you can go to humboldt.edu/OLLI or just call them and say you'd like to get the newsletter. Otherwise, people complain about getting too much email, so we don't try to bombard everybody with a newsletter. But thank you ever so much. This was great.
Thank you. Have a good one.
Yep.
You too.
Thank you, everybody. And I will now end the recording and the meeting.